A Navy SEAL? Honestly, Lily, the stories you children invent. Your grandmother works from home on a computer. Let's stick to reality, shall we? The words from Ms. Albright dripped with a cloying, condescending sweetness that failed to mask the sharp edge of her disbelief. The classroom, a petri dish of sixth-grade social dynamics, erupted in a wave of snickers and muffled laughter. Lily Morgan felt her face burn, a hot tide of shame rising from her chest to the roots of her hair. She stared down at her desk at the crayon drawing of a woman in camouflage holding a rifle, a crude but heartfelt tribute to the hero she knew her grandmother to be. The teacher's judgment was a physical weight, pressing down on her, isolating her in a sea of giggling peers. Lily's grandmother, Sarah, had told her that most people wouldn't understand her career, that it was okay to just say she was a government consultant. But today was Heroes Day, and Lily wanted the world to know her grandmother was a true hero, not just some retired office worker. Ms. Albright continued her lecture on honesty, her voice a droning instrument of public humiliation. Lily didn't hear the words, only the tone of absolute certainty, the smug satisfaction an adult correcting a child's fanciful lie. She said nothing. She didn't cry. She just sat perfectly still, her posture straight, her hands folded on her desk, a miniature echo of the silent discipline she had learned from the very woman being dismissed. But in the hushed corridors of the school's administrative wing, Principal Mr. Davies was about to place a phone call that would shatter the teacher's comfortable reality. He had seen the quiet dignity in Lily's file, the sparse emergency contact information that listed only a single heavily redacted Department of Defense line. He had a feeling, a deep-seated unease, that Miss Albright's casual arrogance was a misstep of monumental proportions. The phone call to Sarah Morgan was brief and professional. Mr. Davies explained the situation, his tone apologetic, conveying a sense of urgency that went beyond a simple classroom dispute. On the other end of the line, there was no outrage, no defensive shouting, no emotional outburst. There was only a pause, a pocket of absolute silence that seemed to stretch for an eternity, pregnant with unspoken weight. Then a calm, level voice, devoid of inflection, spoke just 3 words. "I'll be there." The line went dead. Sarah Morgan placed her phone down on the polished surface of her workbench, her movements economical and precise. She was not in a corporate home office, surrounded by spreadsheets and coffee mugs. She was in a soundproof workshop, a clean, sterile environment filled with meticulously organized tools and disassembled components of advanced communication hardware. At 65 years old, Sarah Morgan was not what most people imagine when they thought of Navy SEAL. Her hair, now more silver than brown, was pulled back in the same tight bun she had worn for 4 decades. Her face bore the lines of time and experience, weathered but strong, with a quiet authority that came not from volume but from presence. Her hands, which Miss Albright had imagined tapping away at a keyboard in some mundane retirement hobby, were still scarred and steady, hands that could field strip a rifle in complete darkness or suture a wound under pressure. Age had not diminished her capability, only refined it, distilling decades of experience into an even more potent form of competence. She rose from her stool, her compact frame moving with a fluid grace that belied both her age and the immense coiled strength that remained. Retirement from active duty didn't mean retirement from service. Her expertise in encrypted communications and signals intelligence was more valuable than ever, and she still consulted on the highest level operations. Her face, framed by that silver hair, was a mask of placid neutrality. But her eyes, those pale, piercing blue eyes, held a different story. They were the eyes of a person who had looked into the abyss and had not flinched. Eyes that assessed, calculated, and saw through cheap facades. Eyes that time had only made sharper. She made one other call, her words just as clipped and technical as always. "Vance, situation at the school. Lily, Protocol Gamma." An acknowledgement came back instantly. "On our way." There was no need for further explanation. Protocol Gamma wasn't for threats. It was for validation. It was for moments when a quiet world of shadows had to intersect with a loud, oblivious world of daylight. A protocol designed to correct a fundamental injustice with overwhelming, undeniable proof. She changed from her work clothes into a simple pair of jeans and a plain gray Henley, an outfit designed to be invisible, to blend in. But as she walked out to her unassuming truck, she knew that invisibility was no longer the mission. The mission was clarity. The arrival was not loud, but it was deafening. It began not with a roar of engines, but with a subtle shift in the atmosphere of the sleepy suburban school. 3 black, immaculate SUVs, the kind that absorb light and betray no hint of their occupants, pulled into the visitor parking lot in perfect synchronized formation. They moved with the eerie silence of predators, their tires barely whispering on the asphalt. They didn't park. They established a perimeter. Doors opened in unison, and from them emerged a dozen men and women. They were not in uniform. They wore the same kind of civilian attire as Sarah: jeans, boots, functional jackets, a uniform of deliberate anonymity. Yet they moved with shared, ingrained discipline that was more commanding than any dress uniform could ever be. Their posture was identical, relaxed but alert, hands empty and visible, eyes constantly scanning, assessing, missing nothing. They were of different ages and builds, but they shared a common aura of deep, unshakable competence. They were the living embodiment of quiet professionalism. Sarah Morgan emerged from her own truck, and the team fell into a loose but impenetrable diamond formation around her. Their movements were fluid and instinctive, a silent testament to countless hours of training together, some of it decades old but never forgotten. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. Their very presence was a statement. As they approached the school's entrance, the crossing guard froze, her bright orange vest suddenly seeming foolish and insignificant. Students pressing their faces against classroom windows fell silent, their playground chatter dying in their throats. The school secretary looked up from her computer, her welcoming smile faltering as she took in the procession. It wasn't an army. It was something far more potent. It was a surgical instrument, a team of operators who had worked at the highest echelons of national security. And they had come to a 6th grade classroom to stand behind one of their own. Several parents in the parking lot stopped in their tracks. One veteran father, dropping off a forgotten lunch for his son, recognized something in the way these people moved. He straightened reflexively, his hand moving unconsciously toward a salute before he caught himself. He knew. He didn't know the details, but he knew. Ms. Albright was summoned to the principal's office, a self-satisfied smirk playing on her lips. She assumed the grandmother had arrived, likely flustered and defensive, ready to offer excuses for her granddaughter's pathological lying. Perhaps there would be tears, protestations about the child's overactive imagination. She walked down the hallway with a confident stride, prepared to deliver a firm lecture on parental, or in this case, grandparental, responsibility, and the importance of teaching truthfulness to children. But as she rounded the corner and saw the assembly of silent figures standing outside Mr. Davies's office, her step faltered, her smirk dissolved, replaced by a flicker of confusion, then a growing knot of anxiety. These were not the late or apologetic family members she was used to dealing with. These were something else. The team stood like statues, their gazes neutral but penetrating. They made no move to acknowledge her, yet she felt as if she were being scanned, weighed, and found wanting. In the center of them stood a woman, silver-haired and average in height and build, her expression unreadable. This had to be Lily's grandmother. But this was not the elderly woman Ms. Albright had imagined, not some soft grandmother type who baked cookies and knitted. This woman stood with the bearing of someone who had commanded respect in far more dangerous places than a suburban school. Despite her age, or perhaps because of it, she radiated an authority that was almost palpable. Ms. Albright's arrogance, a brittle shield forged in the petty squabbles of the PDA, began to crack. She pushed open the office door, nervous energy now thrumming beneath her skin. Inside, Mr. Davies sat behind his desk, his face pale and beaded with sweat. Lily was there, standing beside her grandmother, her small hand held firmly in Sarah's weathered but steady grip. The silence in the room was absolute, a heavy blanket that smothered all other sound. "Ms. Albright," Mr. Davies began, his voice strained. "This is Mrs. Morgan. We need to discuss what happened in your class today." The teacher summoned, a last vestige of her authority. "Yes, I'm glad she's here." Lily made some very imaginative claims about her grandmother being a Navy SEAL. I was simply trying to steer her back to reality. At her age, her grandmother would have retired decades ago from any such service. If it were even true, the words, which had sounded so reasonable in the classroom, now sounded hollow and foolish in the crushing silence of the office. Sarah Morgan's expression did not change. She simply looked at the teacher, her calm gaze a far more powerful indictment than any angry retort. There was something in those eyes, something that made Ms. Albright's confident words die in her throat. One of the people who had been waiting in the hall stepped forward, entering the office and closing the door softly behind him. He was older, perhaps in his early 70s, with silver hair cut military short and a face etched with the lines of command. He wore a simple blazer, but he carried himself with an air of authority that was unmistakable. He nodded respectfully to Sarah before turning his attention to the teacher and the principal. "Mr. Davies, Miss Albright," he said, his voice a low, resonant baritone that commanded immediate attention. "My name is Colonel James Vance, United States Navy, retired. I am Master Chief Petty Officer Morgan's former commanding officer and current operational liaison." The titles, delivered with such casual finality, hung in the air. Master Chief, Commanding Officer. Ms. Albright's mind struggled to process the information. It didn't make sense. This woman had to be retirement age. Well, past it even. Colonel Vance continued, his tone remaining level but gaining an edge of cold steel. "I understand there's been some confusion regarding Master Chief Morgan's profession and service record. Let me provide some clarity." He didn't consult a file or phone. He spoke from memory forged in years of shared service and sacrifice. "You dismissed her granddaughter's claim that she was a Navy SEAL, Ms. Albright. You were mistaken. Master Chief Morgan is not just a SEAL. She was one of the first women to ever pass BUD/S selection and be integrated into Naval Special Warfare Development Group. Her operational record is one of the most distinguished in the entire history of SOCOM." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle into the suffocating silence. The teacher's face had gone from confused to ashen. The name of the elite unit, spoken so plainly, was a thunderclap in the small office. Master Chief Morgan served for 38 years in active duty. Colonel Vance continued, his gaze fixed on Miss Albright with surgical precision. She didn't retire until she was 63, and even then, only from active combat operations. She continues to serve as one of our nation's foremost experts in encrypted communications and signals intelligence. Ms. Albright opened her mouth, then closed it again. No words would come. "You stand in a classroom and teach children about heroes, about honesty, about respect," the colonel said, his voice dropping lower, becoming even more intense. "Yet you publicly shame the granddaughter of a woman who has sacrificed more for your freedom than you can possibly comprehend." Each word was measured, deliberate, devastating. Master Chief Morgan has over 200 credited combat missions spanning 4 decades. She holds a Navy Cross, 2 Silver Stars, and 4 Bronze Stars with Valor. She has trained 3 generations of special operators. She has saved more lives than you will ever meet in your lifetime. The credentials were hammer blows, dismantling the teacher's smug worldview piece by piece. The reason she works from home on a computer, as you so dismissively put it, is because she is one of the world's foremost experts in the field. A skill she uses to keep teams like the one standing outside this door alive on battlefields you only see in movies. At 65 years old, her expertise is more valuable than ever. Colonel Vance took a small step closer, his voice dropping to near a whisper, yet carrying more menace than any shout. "Her file is classified above top secret. Her very existence has been a state secret to our nation's enemies for decades. The only reason I am standing here, breaking a dozen protocols, is because she never, ever defends her own honor, but she will always defend her family." He let that hang in the air for a moment. You assumed that because of her age, her granddaughter's claims couldn't possibly be true. You assumed that a woman of 65 couldn't have such a distinguished military career. You were wrong on every count. Age doesn't diminish what she accomplished or who she is. If anything, it makes it more remarkable. Another pause, heavy with judgment. You owe this child an apology, and you owe her grandmother your silence and your respect. Is that understood?" Ms. Albright could only nod, her throat too tight to form words. She looked from the colonel's granite face to Sarah Morgan's placid one, and for the first time she saw her not as an elderly woman to be dismissed, but as a figure of immense and terrifying stature. The principal, Mr. Davies, finally found his voice. "Master Chief," he stammered, rising from his chair, "on behalf of the school, I am so profoundly sorry." Sarah Morgan simply gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. She looked down at Lily, squeezed her hand, and said quietly, "It's okay, sweetheart." Her validation didn't come from the teacher or the principal. It came from the quiet strength within and the unwavering loyalty of the team who stood with her. One of the younger operators, a woman in her 30s, stepped forward and addressed Lily directly, her voice warm but clear. "Your grandmother trained me when I went to the program 10 years ago," she said, crouching down to Lily's eye level. "She's the reason I'm alive today. She's the toughest person I've ever met and the best teacher. You should be very proud." Lily's eyes widened and filled with tears, not of shame this time, but pride. The departure was as swift and silent as the arrival. Colonel Vance gave a curt nod, turned, and led his team out of the building. Sarah walked with Lily, the operators once again forming their protective, unspoken diamond around them. They moved through the hallways, a river of quiet purpose, parting the waves of gawking students and staff. No one spoke. The message had been delivered with devastating precision. The SUVs started without a sound and pulled away, disappearing into the fabric of the afternoon, as if they had never been there at all. But they left behind a legend. The story of what happened in the principal's office spread through the school like wildfire, whispered in the library, texted under desks, recounted with breathless awe on the playground. It was a modern-day fable, passed from student to student, then from teacher to teacher, and finally from parent to parent on community forums that evening. The narrative shifted and grew with each telling. The dozen operators became 100. The colonel's words became a thunderous speech. But the core truth remained unchanged. Ms. Albright had made a terrible assumption, and in doing so had insulted a national hero in front of her own granddaughter. The teacher's authority was shattered. The respect she had once commanded through fear and sarcasm evaporated, replaced by a mixture of pity and contempt. The students in her class now looked at her differently, their eyes holding a new, critical awareness. They looked at Lily Morgan differently, too. The quiet girl at the back of the class was no longer just Lily. She was a granddaughter of a hero, a living link to a world of courage and silent sacrifice they had never known existed. The shame that had been forced upon her was gone, replaced by a quiet pride that radiated from her like light. Ms. Albright was placed on administrative leave the following day. The school district, facing a torrent of calls from outraged parents, many of them from a nearby military base, moved quickly to contain the fallout. An official district-wide apology was issued to the Morgan family, though Sarah never publicly acknowledged it. Her mission was complete. The teacher eventually returned, a humbled and diminished figure. She delivered a stilted, tearful apology to her class, and specifically to Lily, who accepted it with the same quiet grace her grandmother had shown in the principal's office. The event became a catalyst for change within the school. Mr. Davies, deeply affected by the incident, spearheaded the creation of a new curriculum module focused on understanding and respecting the contributions of military families. He instituted an annual Veterans Appreciation Week, a far more meaningful event than the superficial Heroes' Day had ever been. A small, discreet plaque was mounted in the school's main foyer, dedicated to the quiet professionals who serve in silence. It mentioned no names, but everyone knew who it was for. The story became part of the school's institutional memory, a cautionary tale told to new teachers during orientation, a lesson in the danger of judging a book by its cover, or judging anyone based on age, appearance, or assumptions. It was the story of the day Master Chief Morgan came to school, a legend that reminded everyone that the most profound strength is often the most silent, and that true heroes don't need applause. They only need to be believed by those they love. Lily no longer had to defend her grandmother's honor. The entire community now stood guard over it. A year later, during the school's inaugural Veterans Appreciation Week, Lily Morgan stood at the podium in the auditorium. She was no longer the shy, quiet girl who shrank from attention. She stood tall, her voice clear and steady as she spoke about her grandmother. She didn't recount the dramatic confrontation in the principal's office. She didn't need to. Instead, she spoke of the small things, the way her grandmother could tie any knot, the calm she projected during thunderstorms, the quiet integrity that guided her every action, the stories she would tell about teamwork and resilience. She spoke of a legacy not just of medals and missions, but of character. My grandmother taught me that you don't have to be the loudest person in the room to be the strongest, Lily said, her eyes finding Sarah in the audience. She taught me that age doesn't define capability, that experience is a gift, and that respect is earned through actions, not words. Sarah sat with Colonel Vance and a few of the other team members, all in their anonymous civilian clothes, a small island of calm in a sea of proud parents. She offered her granddaughter a small, private smile, a universe of love and pride conveyed in a single subtle gesture. The incident with Ms. Albright had been a painful crucible, but from it, a new strength had been forged in both grandmother and granddaughter. It had reinforced a core tenet of Sarah's world, that actions, not words, are the final measure of a person. That competence is its own credential. That respect is not demanded. It is earned through quiet, relentless excellence. She also taught me, Lily continued, her voice growing stronger, that heroes don't stop being heroes just because they get older. In fact, they become even more valuable because they have so much wisdom to share. My grandmother is 65, and she's still one of the most capable people I know. Age isn't a limitation. It's a testament to survival, to adaptation, to decades of excellence. The audience erupted in applause. Sarah remained still, but her eyes glistened. After the assembly, several parents approached Sarah. One mother, with tears in her eyes, thanked her for her service. A father, a veteran himself, simply shook her hand and said, "Master Chief," with a nod of profound respect. But the most meaningful moment came when Miss Albright, who had attended the assembly as part of her remedial professional development, approached Sarah hesitantly. "Mrs. Morgan," she said, her voice small and sincere, "I want to apologize again. I made assumptions based on prejudices I didn't even know I had, about age, about women, about what a hero looks like. I was wrong and I'm sorry." Sarah looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. "We all make mistakes, Ms. Albright. The question is whether we learn from them. I think you have." It wasn't forgiveness freely given. It was forgiveness earned. And that made it mean something. The world is full of noise, of boast and bluster, of people who build their identities on shallow foundations of opinion and prejudice. But beneath that noise, there are others, the quiet professionals, the ones who do the work, who bear the weight, who ask for nothing in return. They are the bedrock on which society stands, the unseen guardians, the silent architects of peace and security. Their legacy is not etched on statues or written headlines. It is woven into the very fabric of the freedom that allows a teacher to misjudge, a child to dream, and a community to learn. It is a living legacy, carried forward in the quiet confidence of a young girl who now understood the true meaning of strength, and in the transformed culture of school that had learned a profound lesson in humility. Sarah Morgan continued her work, consulting on operations that would never be public, training the next generation of operators, serving her country in a way she always had, quietly, competently, without fanfare. Age had not slowed her down. It had only made her more valuable, more wise, more respected by those who truly understood. The true measure of a hero is not the story they tell, but the world they make possible for others to live in. It's the silent promise kept, the unseen watch held, the quiet competence that stands ready in the shadows, waiting for the moment it is needed. That day, it was needed not on a foreign battlefield, but in a sixth-grade classroom, to fight not an armed enemy, but the insidious poison of ignorance and assumption. It was a mission as critical as any other, for it was a fight to defend the truth for a child. And like every mission she had ever undertaken, Master Chief Sarah Morgan had achieved her objective with surgical precision and overwhelming, undeniable force. Moral of the story: never judge people by their appearance, age, or circumstances. The quietest person in the room maybe the strongest, the oldest person in the room, maybe the most capable. True strength doesn't announce itself. It simply exists, proven through decades of action rather than moments of words. Respect is earned through competence and character, not through volume or arrogance. The people who have truly sacrificed, truly served, truly excelled are often the ones who speak the least about it. They don't need your validation, but they deserve your respect. Age is not a limitation. It is a badge of survival, resilience, and accumulated wisdom. Those who have served their country, their communities, and their families for decades have earned the right to be honored, not dismissed. And perhaps most importantly, before you dismiss a child's truth, consider that they may know something you don't. Before you mock someone's story, remember that the world contains depths of courage and sacrifice that comfortable people will never understand. The quiet professionals walk among us. They always have, and they always will. If this story moved you, subscribe to USX Stories for more tales of quiet courage, unexpected heroes, and extraordinary people who live ordinary lives. Hit that subscribe button and join our community of readers who believe that the best stories are the true ones, the ones about real people who make the world better without ever asking for recognition.